First story, the Gulf War Abduction, 1991. It was during the Gulf War in 1991, on a quiet, pitch-black night, when I first saw something that still haunts me to this day. I was stationed with my unit in the southern desert of Iraq, far from any major military base, just the sound of the wind and the occasional static crackling through our comms. I had just finished a routine patrol with my men, and we were sitting in a temporary shelter, trying to relax after a long day. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the eerie silence of the desert and the endless horizon. The moon barely lit the sky, casting long shadows across the sand, and you could hear the distant sounds of artillery in the far-off landscape. That night, though, something was different. The atmosphere felt off, like the air itself was heavier, like something was waiting to happen. It was around 2:30 a.m. when we heard the first strange noise. At first, we all dismissed it as another patrol vehicle, or maybe some of the locals moving around in the distance, but it felt wrong. It wasn't a typical sound of a motor or the wind shifting across the dunes. No, this was something mechanical, something unlike anything we had heard before. It didn't sound like a jet nor a helicopter, just wrong. I remember standing up, my senses suddenly heightened. As I looked toward the sky, I saw something that made my heart drop. At first, it was just a small pinpoint of light, no bigger than a star. But then it started to move, slowly, silently, almost as if it was aware we were watching. The light wasn't just a random flare, it was deliberate, focused. It was almost as if it was looking for something. My mind raced. Was it a military craft? A drone? Maybe a weather balloon? But as the light grew larger and began to shift positions, my doubts faded. The light was too precise, too controlled to be anything I had ever seen before. Then I saw it. A beam of light shot down from the source, hitting the sand below with pinpoint accuracy. I froze, my entire body numb as the beam widened, expanding and glowing in an unnatural, vivid hue. It was like nothing I could describe. Too bright, too sharp. And then it happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw one of my comrades, a young soldier named Matthews, moving closer to the beam, almost as if he was being pulled toward it. His body seemed to shift, jerk as if controlled by an unseen force. I shouted his name, but it was too late. Matthews was closer to the light now, almost halfway to it, and I could see his body stiffening, his eyes wide open in sheer terror, like he was trying to scream but couldn't. It was as if something was physically taking control of him, pulling him upward against his will. The air around him seemed to warp, the heat rising and shimmering off the desert floor, distorting everything around him. The light from the beam intensified, now a pure white, so bright that I had to squint just to keep watching. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something, but my legs were frozen. I couldn't understand what was happening. Matthews was now barely a foot off the ground, his body rigid like he was being lifted by invisible hands. Then, without warning, he was yanked into the air. The beam of light flared up with an unnatural intensity, and in an instant, Matthews was no longer visible. He just disappeared into the sky. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like time stood still for a second. I swear I heard a faint hum, like a high-pitched noise, and then nothing. He was gone. There wasn't a trace, no sign of struggle, no remnants left behind. I ran toward where he had been, shouting his name, but the sand was undisturbed, as if nothing had happened at all. I couldn't breathe. my chest tightening, my stomach churning. I was sweating now, the cold night air doing nothing to calm me. The others started to rush toward me, asking what had happened, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't even make sense of it myself. I turned back to look at the sky, expecting to see the same light. But it was gone. Everything was still. The silence was unbearable. We searched for hours, desperate, trying to make sense of what had just occurred, but there was nothing. No sign of Matthews, no trace of the light, no disturbance in the sand. Just the empty desert stretching out in all directions. The sky was clear, devoid of any stars or signs of movement. It was as if the entire thing had been some kind of twisted hallucination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen. I could still feel the terror of watching him get pulled into the sky, the horrible realization that something was out there. Something far beyond our understanding. The others were starting to lose hope, talking about it being a freak accident, but I couldn't let it go. I knew I had witnessed something that defied logic, something I couldn't explain, but would never forget. The days after that incident felt like a blur. We were all pulled off patrols, given orders to stay put, and told nothing more about what had happened. There was an official report made, of course, but it was all generic. They told us it was likely some kind of natural phenomenon or a freak weather event, but nobody actually believed that. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Matthew's face, frozen in terror. I kept replaying the moment over and over. His body lifted from the ground, the light pulling him upward, the utter silence. The fear that had gripped me when I realized I couldn't do anything to stop it. What terrified me the most was the thought that whatever had happened to him, whatever took him, could happen to any of us, and that we wouldn't even see it coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bunk, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about what Matthews must have felt, about how completely powerless he must have been. I heard whispers around camp, some saying that Matthews had gone AWOL, others speculating that it was just a freak accident. But none of those stories rang true. I felt the cold sweat on my back whenever I thought about the light, the glow, the hum. Weeks went by, and the desert seemed to swallow up any trace of that night. It was as if everything had been erased. There was nothing in the papers, no follow-up from any officials, nothing at all. It was like the whole thing had been buried. But I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about the light, the pull, the sound, and the way it felt as if the world had bent around us in that moment. I spoke to a few of the others, people who had been with me that night, but no one seemed to want to talk about it. It was as if they were afraid to. One guy, Robinson, he looked at me like I was crazy when I brought it up. "Forget about it," he said. "It was nothing." But I couldn't. I started digging. I read up on everything I could about the Gulf War, about strange occurrences, about reports of lights in the desert. I found some things, incidents that were eerily similar. There were whispers of other soldiers who'd gone missing, sometimes found miles away from where they'd been, last seen, sometimes never found at all. There were stories of lights in the sky, bright flashes that seemed to appear from nowhere, but every single one of these reports was quickly dismissed, buried under layers of military bureaucracy. I even came across reports from other soldiers, stationed in the same area, telling similar stories. But they were just stories, right? All coincidences, nothing to tie them together. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening in that desert. something bigger than all of us. Then one night, I heard it again. The hum. It wasn't a dream. I was lying in my cot when the low, high-pitched sound reached my ears. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, almost like it was coming from just outside my tent. My heart began to race. I wasn't the only one who heard it. I could see the others stirring, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They looked around the room, searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing. Then I heard a voice in the distance, a faint, distant call. It was almost a whisper, but I could make out the words. "Help me." My blood ran cold. The voice sounded just like Matthew's. It sounded like it was coming from the sky. I jumped up, ran outside, and looked up at the night sky. Nothing, just a starry void. But then, out of nowhere, a flash of light appeared, far off in the distance. It was just like the light I had seen that night, the night Matthews disappeared. I stood there, frozen, as the light pulsed in the distance. My heart was in my throat. I felt the same sense of dread I had that night, like something was watching us, waiting. But this time I wasn't just a spectator. I knew something was coming, something that had already claimed one of us, and now it was coming for the rest of us. The next few days were a blur of tension. We had a briefing where the higher-ups tried to convince us that everything was fine, that it was all just a coincidence, just paranoia from being stuck out in the desert for too long. They told us to get back to work, to focus on our duties, and to stop spreading rumors. But there was no way to ignore what had happened, and there was no way to pretend like we hadn't all heard the hum. It was like they were covering something up, brushing it under the rug. But the strangest thing, no one else outside our unit seemed to be aware of it. No one else had heard the voice, seen the lights. It was as if we were the only ones who knew. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything I could remember, times, dates, the things I'd heard, the strange feelings I couldn't shake. I wasn't the only one who felt it. Robinson started to act strangely too. He had this distant look in his eyes, like he was trying to piece something together. Sometimes late at night I'd catch him staring at the sky, his eyes locked on some invisible point in the air. He would mutter to himself, almost as if he were trying to make sense of the things we couldn't explain. But whenever I asked him what was going on, he'd just shake his head and walk away. I couldn't help but wonder, was I losing my mind? Was this all some kind of collective hallucination brought on by the stress, the isolation, the constant danger? But deep down, I knew something was happening, and whatever it wasn't natural. One night it got worse. I was on watch, standing guard by one of the equipment trucks. The desert was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint glow of distant campfires. There was a quiet stillness in the air, and for a moment I thought maybe everything was going to be okay, that maybe I was just imagining things. But then the ground beneath me started to vibrate, ever so slightly, like the whole desert was alive. And then I heard it again. The hum. This time it was louder. It wasn't a distant sound, but one that seemed to be coming from the very earth itself. I looked around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. Just the emptiness of the desert. I felt a chill crawl up my spine and my breath caught in my throat. Suddenly, a light appeared, just like the one that had taken Matthews. It was far away at first, but it moved closer, gliding across the sky. I couldn't tear my eyes away. My heart was pounding in my chest. The light grew brighter, larger, until it was almost blinding. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, trapped in some kind of trance. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving nothing but the vast emptiness of the desert. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there, that something had been watching us all along. The next morning, I went to see the lieutenant. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed answers. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. I told him everything, the hum, the lights, the voice. I expected him to laugh it off, to tell me to get a grip, but instead he listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to dismiss it. After I finished, he just looked at me with a blank expression, like he was waiting for me to say something else. "You're not the first one to report these things," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you're not seeing something. Just be careful, all right?" It wasn't much of an answer, but it was something. It wasn't until later that I realized what he'd meant. He wasn't saying nothing was happening. He was saying there was something happening, but it was bigger than all of us. Something we couldn't control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the lieutenant had said. If others had reported the same thing, then maybe it wasn't just us. Maybe the lights were real. Maybe whatever had taken Matthews was still out there, waiting for the next soldier to vanish. The days that followed felt like a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, like there was something out there in the desert that was aware of us. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the whispers among the soldiers only seemed to grow louder. Some said it was just the stress, that the constant danger and uncertainty were playing tricks on our minds. Others swore they'd seen the same lights, the same hum. Some even claimed they'd heard voices in the wind, faint whispers, too quiet to make out. It wasn't just a few of us anymore, it was becoming widespread. Everyone was starting to feel it. We were all becoming paranoid. I could see it in the way people moved, the way they looked over their shoulders, the way their eyes darted nervously at the sky when the sun dipped below the horizon. It was like we were waiting for something we couldn't understand, something we couldn't prepare for. Robinson was the worst. He stopped talking altogether, except for those quiet, rambling murmurs in the middle of the night. At first I thought he was just scared, but then I started to realize he wasn't scared. He was obsessed. He had to know what was happening. He'd spend hours out on his own, staring at the stars, talking about theories, about things he couldn't explain. He started bringing up UFOs, conspiracies, strange government experiments. I didn't know what to think. But I couldn't help but wonder, was he right? Was this part of something bigger, something beyond our understanding? One night, things took a turn for the worse. I was out on patrol again, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. The desert was eerily still, and the only sound was the crunch of sand beneath my boots. Then it came, the hum, faint at first like a distant engine. But it grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was surrounding me. My heart began to race. I tried to stay calm, to remind myself it was just the desert, just the stress. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I looked up at the sky, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a light, small at first but growing larger. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen before. It didn't flicker or blink like a plane or a helicopter. It was steady, bright, almost unnatural. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. The light moved across the sky, almost fluid, like it was gliding, not flying. It was coming toward me, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. Suddenly, everything went black. The light vanished, and the hum stopped. I was left standing there in total darkness, my breath shallow, my heart pounding. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally came to my senses, I realized I wasn't alone. Robinson was standing next to me, his eyes wide, staring at the same spot in the sky where the light had been. He didn't say a word, just stood there, his body rigid, as if frozen in place. I didn't know what to say either. We both knew what we'd seen, but neither of us had the words to explain it. The following days were a blur. I couldn't get the image of that light out of my head. I kept asking myself, what was it? Was it some kind of military experiment? A weapon? Or was it something else, something far beyond our understanding? Robinson wasn't himself anymore. He had become obsessed with the idea that we weren't alone. He started talking about strange occurrences, pointing to things that none of us had noticed before. The sand seemed to shift in strange patterns, he said. He claimed the wind sounded different, like it was carrying voices. He said the animals weren't acting normal, as if they were avoiding certain areas. I couldn't tell if he was losing it or if there was something to what he was saying. The whole camp was on edge, and the higher-ups seemed to know more than they were letting on. They were always on the move, never staying in one place for too long. The whole operation felt like it was being kept secret, and we were the pawns in some larger game. But the worst part, Matthews had never been found. The official story was that he'd gotten lost, but we all knew that wasn't true. He hadn't just wandered off. Whatever had happened to him, it had taken him, just like it had taken others before him. And as the days went on, I couldn't help but feel like we were next. Whatever was out there, it was watching us, and it wasn't going to stop until it had taken us all. Second story, The Mystery of Hiroshima's Final Hours, Hiroshima, 1945. I remember that day so clearly, as if it happened only yesterday. It wasn't the heat or the chaos of war that made everything feel off, but something else. Something strange that made every person around me feel like we were being watched by eyes we couldn't see. I had heard rumors, of course, strange sightings, whispers about lights in the sky, things moving too fast to identify. But that day, it was different. I was stationed near Hiroshima when the first reports came in. Pilots, military and civilian alike, all talking about these lights. They said they were metallic, glowing in ways that didn't make sense. They moved too fast, zigzagging across the sky, almost as if they were playing with us. At first I thought it was just the usual fog of war, rumors mixing with fear, and fear shaping the stories we were telling ourselves. But the way they moved, I couldn't shake it. These were no birds, no aircraft I knew. The night before the bombing, I couldn't sleep. It was as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for something we couldn't understand. I was out by the docks, just trying to clear my head when I saw it. At first it looked like a star, shining too brightly for the time of night. But as I stared at it longer, I realized it was moving, no, darting. It zipped across the sky, then stopped for a moment, hovering like it was watching us. A metallic gleam flashed from its surface before it shot off again. My heart raced. It didn't feel like a natural phenomenon. It didn't belong. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? How could I explain that I had just seen something I couldn't even begin to identify? As I stood there frozen, I heard voices behind me. A couple of soldiers, faces pale, were whispering about the same thing. Lights. But not just any lights. They said they'd seen the same thing, and worse, they'd seen bodies being lifted into the air by them. As ridiculous as it sounded, something in their eyes made me believe them. They weren't lying. The next day, August 6th, I thought I had witnessed it all. The war had already stripped away so much of our humanity, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened. Next, the air was thick with tension. I was standing near a group of civilians when the first wave of heat hit. Then came the flash, the blinding light that turned everything around us to white. People screamed, and before we could even comprehend what was happening, the ground shook violently. It wasn't just an explosion, it felt like the very earth was being torn apart. I don't remember running or even moving. Everything after the flash was a blur. But in the haze, I thought I saw something. Those lights. They were back. They seemed to hover, almost as if they were guiding the destruction, or maybe feeding off of it. People were screaming, but the sound was muffled as though I was underwater. There were no voices, just chaos. And then, as the blast wave reached us, everything went silent for just a moment. I could see figures, people, civilians, being lifted, suspended in the air by something I couldn't explain. It wasn't gravity. They were floating, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. I saw them disappear into the light, the lights, the bodies. They didn't belong in the same world we were in. When I finally regained my senses, the world had changed. Everything was on fire. Buildings were crumbling to ash, and the air was thick with smoke. But it wasn't just the destruction that terrified me, it was the overwhelming silence. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl. The screams of those around me faded into nothing, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. I stumbled through the chaos, my legs shaky, my mind trying to comprehend what I had just seen. I couldn't shake the image of those people, their bodies hovering, floating, as if they were being drawn into some invisible force. It felt wrong, unnatural, and as I walked through the destruction, I couldn't help but notice the absence of others. There were no bodies where there should have been, no traces of the people who had been around me only moments before. It was as if they had been erased from existence. The only thing that remained were the strange lights in the sky. They had moved higher, hovering over the city like observers, their metallic sheen flickering in the heat. No one talked about it. No one could. We were too stunned, too lost in the aftermath to even process what had happened. It was like the world had turned upside down in an instant, and we were all just trying to figure out where we fit into it. It wasn't until later, when I was gathered with a group of survivors, that I started to hear the stories. People spoke, in hushed tones, eyes wide, hands shaking as they described what they had seen. Some said they saw the lights before the blast, just as the pilots had reported. Others, like me, had witnessed the bodies being lifted into the air. But there was something even more terrifying. Some of the survivors said they had heard whispers, not from people, but from the air itself. It was like the wind carried voices that spoke in languages they couldn't understand. Foreign, guttural sounds that made their skin crawl. I couldn't help but feel that there was something out there with us, something that had been watching and waiting. The thought lingered in my mind, had we been the targets all along? Or were we just caught in the middle of something far greater than ourselves? The longer I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. We weren't just victims of war anymore. We were witnesses. To what? To what kind of power that could rip apart the very fabric of our reality? As the days went by, the nightmares began. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bodies floating, lifeless, weightless, as if they were no longer bound by the rules of nature. The lights were always there, in the background, flashing in ways that defied physics. Sometimes I would wake up, drenched in sweat, heart racing, my body frozen in fear. It wasn't just the memory of the explosion that haunted me. It was the feeling of being watched, of knowing that something was out there, something that had been in the sky long before the bomb fell. The strangest part, no one ever talked about the lights after that day. People seemed to want to forget, to push the strange occurrences to the back of their minds. But I couldn't. The more I tried to forget, the more vivid the memories became. It was as if those lights, those bodies, had branded themselves into my mind. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape them. I started to question if it was all a hallucination, a byproduct of the chaos and fear. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I had seen something that day, something that no human being was meant to see. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. One afternoon, as I was making my way through what was left of the city, I stumbled upon a small group of people huddled together in a narrow alley. They were whispering to each other, eyes darting nervously, constantly looking up as though expecting something to drop from the sky. They caught sight of me and immediately pulled me in. At first they were hesitant, unsure of whether to trust me, but something about the look on my face must have given it away. I wasn't just a survivor. I was someone who had seen it. They started to talk in fragments at first, like they didn't know how to say it. But eventually one of them spoke, voice trembling. "We've been seeing them again." I felt my heart skip a beat. The lights. They had seen them too. But it wasn't just that. They described shadows, figures lurking in the distance. Not human, not even animal. These things moved in a way that defied all logic, bending and shifting as though they existed in more than one space at a time. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back as they described these creatures, tall, thin, with heads too large for their bodies, their eyes dark and absorbing like black holes. I didn't want to believe them, but I had seen the same thing. Something was happening. And it wasn't just the bomb that changed our world. Over the next few weeks, the sense of paranoia grew. People stopped venturing out into the open. The lights still appeared every night, hovering over the ruins of Hiroshima like silent observers, and the strange shadows seemed to multiply. There were whispers that some of the survivors had been chosen, that they had been marked in some way by whatever force was watching us. People began disappearing. At first it was small numbers, but then it escalated, entire families, entire neighborhoods vanishing without a trace. No one knew where they went, no one saw them leave. And then came the worst part, the dreams. I wasn't the only one anymore. People all across the city were reporting the same terrifying visions. We saw ourselves, or rather, versions of ourselves, floating in the same unnatural way that the bodies had before the blast. We were weightless, disembodied, and the lights were there, always present, pulsing, watching. One man claimed he saw a woman being dragged into the sky, pulled by a force too strong to resist. He described it as if she were being drawn into the very atmosphere, never to return. The fear among us was palpable. We couldn't escape what had happened. But what were we running from? What was happening to us? It was one of those nights, late and silent, that I finally saw them again. I was walking through the ruins, barely able to keep my eyes open from exhaustion and the relentless fear that gripped me. I didn't hear it at first, but then I saw it, the faintest glimmer in the sky. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of a burning building or the last embers of a fire. But no, this was different. The light pulsed. It shifted in patterns that were far too deliberate. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the light disappeared. My breath caught in my chest. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct in my body told me to run, to hide. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. But when I finally moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, watching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. No sound, no movement, just the dead air of a city broken beyond recognition. The fear, however, didn't leave me. It had never left me. The following morning, I found myself unable to shake off the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the lights anymore. The very air around me felt heavy, as though it was thick with some kind of invisible pressure. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on what little remained of my life. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it became. I started hearing voices, soft whispers in the back of my mind, too faint to make out but persistent, like they were trying to get my attention. I thought I was losing my mind, but when I mentioned it to the others, they all had the same thing to say. The whispers. They had heard them too. At night, when the world was still, the air itself seemed to hum with them. People tried to sleep, but no one could. We were all awake, trapped in a state of constant fear, unable to rest. And then came the worst part. One night, I woke up to find myself standing outside in the middle of the street. I don't remember walking out there. I don't remember anything at all except the feeling of something pulling me, a force I couldn't explain. I had seen it in my dreams, the same force that pulled those people into the sky. But this time, it was real. I could feel the pressure against my chest, pushing me towards something. I had to get away. I ran back to the safety of my shelter, but the whispers followed me, louder now, more insistent. The days started to blur together after that. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake anymore. The boundary between reality and nightmare had become so thin that I wasn't sure which side I was on. The lights still appeared, but now they were different. They were closer. They hovered just above the ruined city, like sentinels waiting for something. People began speaking of sightings, figures moving in the shadows, strange, elongated shapes that didn't belong in the world. I saw them too, more clearly now. I could make out their distorted forms in the periphery of my vision, and every time I tried to focus on them, they disappeared. I was no longer sure what was real. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw a shape in the distance, standing in the middle of a street that was once bustling with life. It didn't move at first, just stood there, silhouetted against the dimming light. But then it began to come closer. I don't know how, but I knew it wasn't human. It was something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward, unsure of whether I was dreaming or truly seeing it. The closer it came, the more the air around it seemed to distort, as though reality itself was warping. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was too late for me to turn back. The moment I locked eyes with it, everything around me went silent. I couldn't hear the wind, the rubble beneath my feet. It was like the world had frozen. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me trembled. I don't know if it was an earthquake or something else, but I could feel the vibrations deep in my bones. The figure continued to move toward me, slowly, deliberately, until I could no longer distinguish it from the darkness. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And just as I thought I would lose my mind, it vanished. The morning after that, I woke up back in my shelter with no memory of how I got there. It was as though the night before had never happened, but I knew deep down that it wasn't a dream. Something had been out there. I could still feel it, its presence like a dark cloud hanging over me. It was as if the city itself was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. I wasn't the only one who had these experiences. More people began to come forward with their own stories, describing the same unearthly presence, the same terrifying sensations of being watched, of being pulled. We were all connected by this force, and yet none of us knew how to stop it. We all agreed on one thing, though. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been unleashed upon Hiroshima, wasn't done with us yet. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going, but there's no turning back now. The days blur into each other, and time has become irrelevant. The nightmares are no longer confined to the dark hours. They come in flashes, even in the daytime. At first, it was just glimpses of figures in the distance, but now they're close, too close. It feels like something is watching me all the time, even when I'm not looking. And I'm not the only one. Others have seen the same things, heard the same whispers. We're all starting to lose track of what's real and what's not. But even when you try to ignore it, the feeling doesn't go away. Just last night, one of the survivors, an old man who used to be a doctor, talked about how he could still feel the heat of the blast, the way it seemed to scorch everything in its path. But what he said next was chilling. There were people in the air, flying with no wings. It sounded insane, like a hallucination. But his eyes, there was something in them. He was convinced, as though he had seen it with his own eyes. And I believe him. There's something not right about all of this, something we can't explain. No one knows what's happening or how to stop it, but every day it feels like we're getting closer to whatever it is that's coming. It's as if the city is alive, a ghost of itself, reaching out to pull us all in. When I walked through the streets today, I saw things I can't explain. The air shimmered with a strange energy, and there were shadows moving just at the edges of my vision. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I don't know if we'll make it through this. I don't know if there's anything left to save. The bomb didn't just destroy the city. It's like it cracked open something we can't put back together. Something we weren't meant to understand. And still, the lights in the sky, they haven't stopped. Sometimes, I wonder if they're waiting for something, or if they're watching, judging us. I don't know what's worse, the uncertainty or the fact that it feels like we're running out of time. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, The Soldier Who Knew Too Much, Vietnam, 1971. It was 1971, in the thick of the Vietnam War. I was stationed in a remote base, far from the fighting but not safe from the constant tension. We didn't get a lot of visitors, but one night I was on guard duty, walking along the perimeter of the base when everything changed. It started with a low hum in the air. Nothing loud, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere. I remember stopping in my tracks, my heart racing, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sky was clear, stars dotting the night, and I could hear the faint chirps of insects. But then, there was this feeling, this overwhelming gut-deep sensation that something was wrong. I looked up, and there above me was this thing. I can't describe it well enough, but it was like a light in the sky. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it was something different. And it was coming closer. I tried to yell for help, but my throat felt tight. The hum grew louder, vibrating deep in my chest. I couldn't move. I felt like I was being drawn in, like everything around me had turned to static. Suddenly, the world around me seemed to fade. The air turned cold, and I could hear nothing but this high-pitched ringing. I don't remember how I got there, but the next thing I knew, I was standing in a place that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was bright, too bright. And the ground, it wasn't dirt or grass, it felt like rubber, soft but firm beneath my boots. And there were these creatures, these things, tall, thin, impossibly tall. I couldn't look them in the eyes, but I could feel them looking at me. Their bodies were like sticks, long arms, long legs, and their skin. It wasn't human. It was pale, almost gray, like something unnatural. They didn't move like people either. They glided silently as if they were floating. I could barely breathe, could barely think. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run. But my body wouldn't listen. One of them reached out, and I swear I could feel its cold fingers on my arm. Everything inside me screamed, but my voice didn't work. I was paralyzed. The next thing I remember, I was back on the base. It was like waking up from a bad dream, but it wasn't a dream. The air was thick again, the hum was gone, and I was standing there shaking. It felt like hours had passed, but when I looked at my watch, only a few minutes had gone by. I didn't know what to think. I couldn't wrap my mind around what had just happened. The creatures, the bright light, the feeling of being somewhere else. It all felt too real, too close. I tried to tell someone, tried to make sense of it, but nobody would listen. They said I was just exhausted, stressed from the war. They laughed it off. The military, they didn't care. They thought I was losing it. They sent me to a psychiatric ward, kept me there for weeks, telling me I was suffering from battle fatigue, that my mind was breaking down from everything I'd seen. I tried to tell them again, but the doctors just nodded, handed me pills and told me to rest. They told me to forget it, but I couldn't forget what happened, what I saw. And no matter how many pills they gave me, nothing would make the images of those creatures go away. They kept me in that psychiatric ward for what felt like forever. Every day was the same. More pills, more tests, more doctors asking the same stupid questions. How did you feel? What was your state of mind? Are you hearing voices? They tried everything to get me to crack, to admit I was losing it. I wasn't the only one there, but I could tell that the others didn't have the same look in their eyes as me. They didn't know what I'd seen. They didn't know what I had felt. I couldn't even describe it, and even if I did, I knew no one would believe me. The way those things looked at me like they were studying me, like they already knew everything about me. It wasn't right. The nurses tried to keep me quiet, tried to tell me that I was just a casualty of war, that the things I saw were just my mind playing tricks. But they didn't understand. I didn't think they ever would. They didn't see what I saw, didn't feel what I felt. But even locked away in that room, I could feel something watching me. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't just the isolation getting to me. It was like I wasn't supposed to be there, like they knew I was still alive, and they were waiting for me to figure out that I wasn't alone in this world anymore. It was during one of my sleepless nights in that sterile, white-walled room that I felt it again. The hum. It wasn't loud, not at first, just like a whisper in the back of my head, faint but undeniable. My heart started pounding in my chest. It wasn't like the usual quiet of the ward. The room seemed colder even, though the air conditioning was off. I could feel it creeping up behind me like a shadow that was just a bit too close. I turned to look out the window, half expecting to see the stars again, but all I could see were the dull lights of the base. Nothing else. The hum grew louder, then softer, then louder again. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the fear was back. It was so familiar, so deeply rooted in me now, that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to find out if it was real, if they were still out there, if they were waiting for me to understand what had happened. I snuck out of the ward the next night. It wasn't hard. Everyone was asleep, and no one seemed to care about me anymore. I was a nobody, just another soldier with a broken mind. But I knew deep down that if I stayed there, I would lose myself completely. I had to go back. I had to find the truth, even if it destroyed me. I crept out into the night, the same night air that had once felt so familiar now feeling suffocating. The hum was still there, quiet at first but growing stronger with every step I took. My pulse was racing, my legs weak from the fear. But I kept going. I had to know. As I reached the edge of the base, I saw it again. That bright light. It was far off above the tree line, but I knew exactly what it was. My stomach dropped. This time I wasn't going to be paralyzed. I wasn't going to freeze like I did before. I had to see it. Had to know if it was real. My feet moved on their own, pulling me forward, closer to the light. But before I could take another step, everything went dark. The hum stopped. The light was gone. And just like that, I was back in my bed in the ward, as if nothing had ever happened. I woke up in the same sterile bed, drenched in sweat, but it wasn't the same feeling as before. I wasn't sure if I had been dreaming or if it was something else, but the air felt wrong. It wasn't the oppressive cold stillness I had grown accustomed to in the ward. There was something else, something thick and suffocating. I could feel it, pressing in on me like it was alive. The room felt smaller, like it was closing in, even though nothing had changed. I sat up, wiping the sweat from my forehead, my heart still pounding in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I been hallucinating? Had I been dragged back into the grip of my broken mind? Or was there something else? Something real, waiting for me to wake up? The hum had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. I knew it was real. They were out there, watching, waiting, The days blurred together after that. I tried to tell the doctors about what happened, about the light, the hum, the feeling of something watching me, but they just nodded and pushed more pills my way. They said it was a side effect of the medication, that I was still adjusting, but I knew the truth. I wasn't crazy, not like they said. What I had seen wasn't some figment of my imagination. I had been taken. Something had happened to me, and they were keeping me here, making me forget, making me think it was just another war wound, just another scar on my broken mind. But the dreams kept coming. Or were they memories? I couldn't tell anymore. The light, the cold air, the sharp alien presence that had surrounded me, it was all too real. I felt it in my bones. And the more I tried to forget, the more they made me feel like I was losing my grip, the more it came back. Every night, the hum. Every night, the fear. Every night, I knew I was one step closer to the truth. One night, after weeks of feeling trapped in that nightmare, I woke up again. But this time I wasn't in the ward. I wasn't in my bed. I was outside in the middle of the jungle. The trees around me were twisted, their shapes unnaturally bent, like they were being pulled in some way I couldn't understand. The ground felt soft beneath my feet, almost like I was sinking into it. I looked up, and there it was again, the light. It was brighter this time, bigger, and I could feel its pull, like it was drawing me in. I couldn't move, couldn't even speak. It was like my body wasn't my own. I was being dragged, pulled by an invisible force toward the center of the light. My mind screamed at me to fight, to run, but my body didn't obey. I tried to reach for my rifle, but it wasn't there. I was alone, unarmed and exposed. And then I saw them. The figures. Tall, thin, with black eyes that seemed to burn into my soul. They weren't like us. They weren't human. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stare into their cold, emotionless gaze. And then, nothing. Everything went black again. When I woke up this time, I was back in the hospital, lying on the same uncomfortable cot. My body was shaking, drenched in cold sweat, but this time it wasn't just the usual panic. Something had changed. The air felt denser, heavier, like the weight of the entire jungle had followed me back. I tried to sit up, but my head was spinning, and my hands were shaking so violently that I couldn't control them. I was flooded with an overwhelming sense of dread. The kind of dread that gnawed at your insides and twisted your stomach into knots. It felt as if I had never truly left that place in the jungle. As if my body had returned, but my mind was still trapped there, still with them. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out. I looked around frantically, desperate for someone, anyone, to come to me. But the room was empty. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing and humming like they were alive. I couldn't escape it. The hum was back. And this time, it was louder. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. It was them, watching, waiting for me to break. The next few days were a blur of forced conversations with doctors, of being prodded and poked, of being told that everything I had seen was just a symptom of my PTSD, that I was imagining things. But I knew it was real. They weren't just figments of my imagination. I had seen them. I had felt them. I had been taken. The worst part wasn't that I couldn't convince anyone. It wasn't that the doctors kept dismissing me as crazy. It was that part of me Part of me started to question if maybe I was losing my mind, maybe this was all in my head. But the longer I stayed in that place, the more I realized that the truth was slipping away from me, just out of reach. I'd catch a glimpse of it, of them, through the fog of my fractured thoughts. The tall, thin figures with their hollow black eyes, the cold, suffocating feeling that always followed. Every time I tried to remember, the details would fade, leaving only the hollow feeling of terror that came with it. The worst part came after I was released from the psychiatric ward. I was sent home, told to rest, to heal, but nothing felt right. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting them to be there, lurking in the corners of my vision. The air was different now. Every sound felt too sharp, too close. I would wake up at night with the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was watching me. It got to the point where I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't shake the sensation that the hum, the sound I had heard so many times before, was still there, buried deep inside my skull. It followed me. It was always there. And as much as I tried to push it away, to forget, it wouldn't go. The nightmares grew worse. The memories, the visions, they never stopped. I started to wonder if I would ever escape them, if I would ever be free of the thing that haunted me. And every time I tried to tell someone, anyone, about what I had experienced, I could see it in their eyes. The pity, the doubt. They all thought I was crazy, but I knew. I knew what I had seen, and I would never forget it. A week later, I decided to try and go out. I thought maybe the fresh air would clear my head. I was wrong. I hadn't even made it to the corner of my street when I felt it. That oppressive weight on my chest, like the world was closing in around me. The hum. It was faint at first, just a whisper beneath the noise of the street, but it grew louder as I walked. It pulsed in my ears, thrumming, with a rhythm that felt too deliberate. My heart started racing, and I broke into a cold sweat. I felt eyes on me, cold, empty eyes that didn't blink, didn't look away. I turned around, half expecting to see one of those creatures standing there, but there was nothing. Only people going about their business, oblivious to the storm. Raging inside my mind, my legs felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of there. I ran. I ran back home, slamming the door shut behind me, but even then the hum didn't stop. It followed me back inside, echoing in the walls, vibrating in my skull. I knew they were there, watching, waiting. As days passed, the isolation grew. The terror I felt wasn't just from the memories anymore. It was from the knowledge that something, someone, was watching me, studying me. The quiet hum had become a constant presence in my life. It didn't matter if I was awake or asleep. It was there. I couldn't escape it. I tried going to the police at one point, thinking maybe if I reported what had happened, someone would believe me. I tried to tell them about the creatures, the lights, the abduction, but I could see it in their eyes. The same pity, the same doubt. The officer had this tired, worn-out look, as if he'd heard this story 1,000 times. He scribbled something down in his notebook, muttered something about PTSD, and sent me on my way. That was the last time I tried to get help. The truth is, no one cares, no one wants to believe, and I can't blame them. It sounds insane, but I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And now, all I can do is wait. Wait for the next time they come. Because I know they will, they always do. The last time it happened, I thought I had gone crazy. I had just started to accept that maybe it was all in my head, that the trauma was playing tricks on me. But then, I woke up again. This time it wasn't just a nightmare. It wasn't just the hum or the feeling of being watched. I could feel them right there in my room. I could feel their presence like a cold wind brushing against my skin. I tried to move, to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own bed. I could see the outline of something, tall, thin just like before, looming over me. Its eyes were wide, black, like pits of emptiness. It reached down, and I felt something sharp against my skin, cold metal scraping against my arm. And then, just like that, it was gone. I woke up in the same position, in the same bed, but everything felt wrong. It felt like they had never really left. I haven't been able to sleep since. I'm telling you this because I don't know what else to do. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this. But I know one thing for sure. They'll be back. They always come back. And I don't think I can stop them anymore. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.